Maylands Historical and Peninsula Association are proud to be sponsored by some of our local businesses. NTY, our established local real estate agent. Rufo's, for great coffee and great pizzas. Esteban's, offering you hairdressing excellence. Clinicare, for all your pharmacy needs. Rubble Books and Games, a family-run bookstore. Lyric Lane, for good food, drink and music. Mastengo, suppliers of non-preservative wine. Maylands Park Shopping Centre, offering you mall-style shopping in Maylands. These local businesses support us. We think they deserve your support. Good evening. About 7 years ago, I wanted to put on a display at the old police station of sport in Maylands. I found two A3-sized prints of photographs of women playing football. So that went alongside the men playing football, and that was great. In the back of my mind was the problem, did we have a women's team? Did they play regularly? Was it what happened with football, women's football, in Maylands? After about 4 years, I found where the match had been played, because that wasn't mentioned. It was just two photographs with no labels, nothing. I was told, yeah, it was in the 20s. And I found in the Western Mail 6 more photographs of that day. They're all on those boards there. And that led me to wonder how many times they'd played, who else played, all the rest of it. And that was the cause of tonight's talk. The troubles in Austria and Eastern Europe in 1914 and the assassination of a minor archduke had unforeseen consequences here in Maylands some 7 years later. A large percentage of the men in this state, and all the other states, headed off to Turkey and to France, leaving behind major employment gaps. The only solution was to move women out of their kitchens and into the shops, factories and offices. And for the first time since the Middle Ages, society found that male or female, people are so similar. The newly working women, no longer isolated behind their front doors, did what men have always done in a group environment. They formed social groups to relax together away from their employment. While there were probably knitting and cooking groups formed, some of the young ladies did the unthinkable. They formed sporting groups to play sport. While tennis and cricket were seen as gentle sports suitable for the weaker sex, football in its assorted incarnations was definitely a man's game. Women had played football before, even before the Boer War. Some New Zealand ladies were playing rugby football in 1890, and a proposed tour of Sydney and Melbourne by a team of ladies from across the Tasman was sadly called off. Hang on. There we go. It was sadly called off in 1891. A team of lady footballers has been promoted in New Zealand. So obviously football for ladies was a thing. British football, the real footy, with a round ball, was played by women from around about 1895 in Britain. And now here is where I reveal that I made a major boo-boo in my original research for this talk, and why everything needs to be checked and double-checked and triple-checked. This information was found about 4 years ago in this book, which was online at that time. It is no longer online, but I've got a couple of photographs from it. That team and women's football Perth 1900. Although Australian rules football has never become a fully organised sport for women, there have been local competitions and matches over the years. A typical formation is this company team of ladies playing for Foy and Gibson's department store in Perth. Their ladylike looks and lovely uniforms might be an indicator that the rough and tumble game of football is peculiarly unsuited to women. Okay, that seems to be standard. However, I have recently checked that, double-checked it, and that photograph is in the State Library labelled Foy and Gibson's team 1917. Okay, I accept that. I was wrong because I didn't dig hard enough the first time. But that photograph is 1917. However, that was not the first team. This is in 1911, up in Kalgoorlie. There's a match between four of the largest business establishments in Kalgoorlie. Brennan Brothers. Mr. Brennan was the Brennan who eventually came down to Perth, and we'll talk about him again later, and founded the trotting track at Gloucester Park. That was originally Brennan Park. So he was into sport, and he was into sport for his shop girls. There was Brennan Brothers, Montgomery Brothers challenging the employees of Messrs Phimister and Co. and Mackenzie and Co. And there's lists of the teams, but no real result was shown in the paper the following day, sadly. But it was played in 1911. So anyway, the troubles then began in Europe, and many of the men and very few women went with them as nurses and embarked for various points in the Northern Hemisphere. Industry and commerce found they had a shortage of manpower, and even though they designated many men as being in essential industries, they were still short. So women were brought out of their kitchens and began working in groups. There was socialising, and there were friendships, and there were the standard "we're better than you" taunts at other workplaces. Competitive games of sport were begun. Not that they were not often reported in the press. There was a game in 1917, which I think might have been that one that we saw earlier, a popular girl competition for Parkerville Children's Home. And two teams of lady footballers played a contest at Subiaco Oval. That was one of the key things that happened. The men played football for fun and profit. They were paid from the gate money. The women weren't allowed to make money from it. They had to play for charity. It wasn't for fun, it was for charity. There's a big difference. Team from there. And should ladies play the winter game? The Earl of Lonsdale, our greatest sportsman peer from England, sends the following to a contemporary: "I have not the slightest hesitation in saying that I think the one game ladies ought not play is football. There is nothing so splendid as a well set up, active Englishwoman, and there are many games in which she can compete with man, and almost on equal terms, but football is certainly not one of these." And so he goes on. Women should not play football. So there was too much news from the fronts. They filled up the papers. Got to think, back in the First World War, there were a number of papers in Perth. It wasn't just one. But then the war ended and men began returning home. Many were disabled and not in a fit state to play sport. Some were, but not all. and it came up again. That women can play football, there is no doubt. For some of the munitions girls one used to watch in wartime, displayed skill, endurance, judgment worthy of a professional. This is out of England. They're talking the round ball game, real football. In favour of the sport, one may say that the violent exercise expands the lungs, oxygenates the blood, and it stimulates the heart, in consequence of which the figure is developed and the complexion improved. On the other hand, football, no matter how fairly played, is a rough and tumble game. It would, I think, have a coarsening and distinctly bad effect upon the female mind, likely to cause a girl to lose much of her feminine charm. Yeah, okay. Right, we keep coming back to that sort of thing. Suddenly there were women playing football, and it was needed as a way of filling some of the gaps in the newspapers left by the cessation of casualty lists and reports from the fronts. In the middle of the 1920 men's season, which was probably played mostly by schoolboys, some country competitions had ladies' games as openers, dare I say, as pre-match entertainment. Match between Southern Cross and Merredon last Sunday. The local ladies' club met on the Railway Reserve and played the third match of the season, which resulted in a win for the Reds by 1 goal. So it was being played in the country early in 1920, or in the middle of 1920. But there's very, very few reports in the press. Doesn't appear until 1921. In May of 1921, thank you, I was wondering who'd picked that up first. Which was at the Mirror in Perth. The girlies played a very good game of football. They kicked more behinds than goals. Boxon was obviously a disbelieving male. Then reports from Kalgoorlie. This is in June 21. Kalgoorlie and Boulder playing against each other. The initial match was a success. Not only was the gate good, the admission was by voluntary contribution, but the spectators evinced great enthusiasm and the players are thereby heartened to go on with the game. Slightly different from the talk in the press in Perth. Women's rugby football. Controversy over rugby football for women still rages strongly in the Sydney press. This actually came with a... Says he double checking something here. It actually came with a headline, which is over there: the fair sex at football, the craze in Sydney, Perth also threatened. So, yes, women playing football, women playing a men's game was a threat. It's interesting, last night I watched a TV show on Joan of Arc. Her crime, her blasphemy, her sin was to wear men's clothing. And that doesn't seem to have changed much. The background principle of that had not changed by the end of the First World War. Women playing men's games was wrong. Okay. Over east, women are taking up rugby football, and a sort of ladies' league is being formed, to which several clubs are affiliated. Nowadays, girls will be girls, but all the same, I wouldn't care about the job of a referee. The mockery just kept on going. At the same time, Miss Eyre, secretary of the York Ladies Club, the Ladies Football Club, wrote to the council asking for permission to use Forest Oval for practice purposes. They agreed, and when it's not otherwise engaged, they could do it. And in some country towns there was progress of a sort. Bunbury Ladies Football. The Mothers' Union was indignant. This led to a very long letter from the organiser of the football teams, football clubs, saying, basically it finished up saying, what has the Mothers' Union ever done for us? Yeah. They even spoke, the organisers in Bunbury, of the possibility of an Australia-wide competition between the states.
John, is this the soccer or is this AFL?
This is AFL.
Right.
And these are the Bunbury teams in 1921. They've actually got names hidden away under there. However, the interesting thing was, very shortly after this was published, that was published in September, 18th of September, on the 26th of September, this suddenly appeared. British Association Games Soccer in Brisbane, a record crowd of 10,000 people went to a game, to a soccer game, played by women. I have a strong feeling that what happened there was that the men in the media, the men running the men's competition, started to think, hey, hang on, that's 10,000 people that should be watching us, not watching ladies muck around. They're pulling our gate money away from us. And as had happened in England with soccer clubs, they decided to stop women from using their grounds. The media decided to stop talking about women's football, which is a bit of a killer when you think that it's for charity. If there's no publicity, no one comes along, what's the point of having the game? So that took, a few meetings by the boys to sort it out, work out their plans. But in 1921, it carried on, luckily. The committee meetings had to be held, AGM swayed, and the women kept on playing. The press was still sounding warnings of things to come. Ah yes, here it is. My favourite headline of all time. If women play football, society as we know it is doomed. Perth also threatened. And so in October, shortly after that, Foy and Gibsons were reported as playing 3 matches against Bowens. I love the headline, Girleens in Guernseys. They are there, we don't approve, so we will denigrate. Feminine footballers. After an interval of 2 or 3 years, women were again seen playing football yesterday afternoon. It took place at Leederville. To me, this indicates that there had been matches through the war. They hadn't been reported. I've gone right through Trove about 3 times in about 4 or 5 different ways of looking for it, and there's nothing else during the war. There's that game in Kalgoorlie, there's a game in 1917 for Parkerville, there's nothing else. And here all of a sudden, because they need to fill up the space, they're talking about it. Ladies playing football was not new by 1921, although some of the reporters, male to a man, chose to treat it as a new phenomenon. Busselton also had teams playing. Don't forget, back then it was hard to travel even from Bunbury to Busselton. That was a major journey. So Busselton had its own competition, Bunbury had its own competition, and Perth had its own competition. There were competitions in various towns on the way up to and including Kalgoorlie. One of the outcomes of this first match between Foys and Bowens is something one day I hope to be able to find a solution to. This is the advertisement on the 15th of October for the Majestic Theatre in Perth. And if you look down at the bottom, looking, there we go, girls football, Bowens versus Foys, and other local scenes. So they made it to the Friday night flicks. They were one of the newsreels. I have not been able to find it in at the State Library. Hopefully someone has got a copy somewhere. Maybe, maybe not. It could be just history. That film, over the next 3 months, travelled to Albany, to Collie and to a number of other country places as well. And it's advertised each time. One day when I get plenty of time, I'll go in and spend a lot of time at the State Library looking for it. Unless someone else finds it first. Later that month, ladies at football to assist the appeal for the blind. The return football match between the athletic damsels, the Bowen brothers and Foy and Gibsons, will take place on Leederville Oval. Bowen's girls won the first match. They won it by 18 points. But Foy's lassies are determined to try and finish in front next week when a big audience is expected to witness the game. Again, it is emphasised that the ladies are not playing for fun or for profit. That would be unladylike. They are playing for charity, a noble and most feminine activity. Second match. Boys won by 17 points. They lost by 18. They won by 17. And they seem to have led all the way. Numerous fixtures are announced in aid of the call of the blind, among of which being the ladies' football match will be played. This is at the end of October, and this is the third match that they're talking about. And this time, the photographs. I admire their stamina playing in gear like that. Yeah. And then that was the third match. The game did not provide a very edifying spectacle, and muscular damsels will get much more fun and useful exercise from tennis or hockey than from toe ball. Not a huge return for the effort, yet the game was played and presumably had the support of the Emporium's owners. The game, in actual fact, was a tie. The third match was a tie. So, where do we go? So it was billed as the premiership match to help the war-maimed soldiers, and that's leading up to it. They played, the game concluded with honours even, 5 goals, 7 behinds each. So that was a tied game. Then, later in November, a team of girls will meet a Maylands Norwood 18 at the Leederville Oval at 3 o'clock. And this was the game that got me into this whole situation. Proceeds to the St John's Ambulance and the Clontarf Orphanage. Clontarf band in attendance, and Mr Ivo Crapp will umpire the game. He umpired a number of the women's games. And so the Maylands girls are obvious. Maylands men's team wore black and white stripes, as do Swan Districts today. And that's where it came from. It came from the men, the Maylands men, the Maylands girls, and it moved on to Swan Districts. So that's an interesting little bit of history there. Not that I like Swan Districts. Sorry guys. The combined shops team was, yep, so there they are. Combined shops team was photographed, as was the Maylands team. Families do move around, but they tend to leave some of their members in the original home place. The home place, the village or the suburb. And so some of these ladies would have descendants still in Maylands and in Mount Lawley. Sadly, it appears that women's football was not a subject for discussion over the morning cuppa. Consequently, it was never passed on to the daughters that their mother had played football. Even more sadly, other than the 8 photographs published in the Western Mail, there were no results ever reported, no scores, no names of players. They are all anonymous. As a reader, I know that anonymous for thousands of years has been a woman. And they still are. Well, they still were in the 20s. There was one result from it. Brother Superior of the Clontarf Orphanage begs to acknowledge with thanks the receipts of £5, 8 shillings from Mrs Grieve of Bayswater as the result of the ladies' football match held recently at Leederville Oval. So that was a result. That was the only reference to the match after it took place. Meanwhile, in the Goldfields, a successful season ended and there were premiership winners who got their names and photo in the Kalgoorlie Miner. Sadly, Trove, the newspaper concern has deteriorated badly, so Trove were not able to get a really good image of that newspaper. But the names are there, and on the original they can be just made out. So they actually had premiership winners in Kalgoorlie. 1922. Oh, hang on. Sorry, that's too soon. I put that in the wrong place. Yikes. Okay, I put that in the wrong place. Hang on. Last year, ladies' football, this is in May 1922. Last year, ladies' football made its first organised appearance in WA. In Bunbury, there were 2 strong teams which made frequent appearances, and in the city, several matches were played. This year, the hitherto weaker sex show that the mere male will no longer have the muddied field as an undisputed possession. Australia in the main follows the example of the British Isles. Therefore, the following news item attracts attention. Football among women is becoming so popular in Scotland that there is likelihood of a league competition being arranged. There are strong teams in Edinburgh, Cowdenheath and Rosyth in Fifeshire. And one has been formed at Glasgow, composed of waitresses and saleswomen of one of the big restaurants. After the success and ambitions of women's football in 1921, one would expect growth in 1922. However, it seems an eerie silence fell over the game. There were still some matches being played because there are references in the columns devoted to gifts for charities. But no advertising of the matches, no match reports. Would it be too fanciful to consider that the match back in September of 1921 of 10,000 spectators at a soccer match in Brisbane had led to a panic among the male sports reporters and the male administrators? They could see a diminution of their income stream and influence in the games, and that an unmentioned and unofficial ban had been imposed on women's football. The next reference in the city papers to women's football is found in 1925. I spoke of Brennan's earlier in Kalgoorlie. He moved down to the city, and in 1925 there's a grand final between women's teams. And Brennan's staff is included in that grand final. To be a grand final there had to be previous matches. No reports anywhere. Absolute dead silence. And I can't find any reference to them playing between 1911 and 1925. I can't find any reference to them playing after 1925. Also in 25, that football is played by the fair sex is in a popular vein in Carnarvon was evidenced on Monday last when teams captained by Mrs Bennett and McAllister respectively played their return match on the recreation ground. Again, a second game is being reported. No mention of the first in the press. It's all by itself. So it's very sporadic. There are occasional references to matches in country papers, including this one from Carnarvon. Interestingly, there was a full team list and fairest and best players noted along with the scores. Undoubtedly, there were matches played in the following 15 years, but they were only mentioned in the press as a novelty part of the country shows and were often played in fancy dress. In 1940, just after the start of the war, Second World War, cricket is a game most suitable for ladies, but I don't approve of football. I saw one ladies' football game and I came away so shaken that it was days before I felt all right again. The idea seemed to be grab somebody by the hair, it didn't seem to matter whom, hurl her to the ground and then fall over her. Whoever gets up last has a Guernsey torn to ribbons. All women's football teams have a ball on the field just for the look of the thing. I wouldn't play in a women's football team for all the coffee in Alaska. It has been said that all women are savages at heart. It's quite true too. Melt in your arms 1 minute and belt you in the face the next. I know. The ridicule continued. That's in the Daily News. To be fair, it was part of a totally anti-woman in sport tirade which tried vainly to be humorous. It apparently originally appeared in the Australian Women's Weekly. The joys of poor history keeping, poor memories, no computers to do your remembering for you. Women play football. This is in 1944. Football history will be made in this state when two teams of women will meet at the Bassendean Oval. 20 years before the same thing was happening. But this is brand new. It's never happened before. The first ladies' match and history made as women play football were headlines used several times over the decades. During World War II, there was a publicised match played by the women working at the WAGR workshops in Midland, the railways. And there's a photograph. Not a lot had changed, excepting for the outfits. They're no longer wearing long dresses. There were probably other matches played which were not publicised. From our modern place in history, We know that publicity is all. Without it, nothing happens. The occasional mockery in print and the lack of photographs and reportage kept women's football as something which was a small, niche form of sport. Not a lot has changed in these 20 years other than the playing outfits. And to the ladies who carried on fighting for the next 40 years to make a place for women in footy in all its forms, I dips me lid and say thank you. Oh, and Carl the Dockers in both competitions. Thank you.
Any questions or comments, contributions? No. There you go.
Look, I really appreciate it, and I think it's really great considering a lot of the fledgling AFL associated, waffle associated
Yes.
women's leagues are now having to combine under the gender equity, whatever you want to call it,
Yes.
that we're no longer whatever we are.
Yep.
It's the disparity between what is reported in the media of football and soccer is interesting because you jump from one to another, and
Yes.
And it's true when you actually do research it, you're not quite sure whether you're watching football or soccer.
That's right.
And even years ago, you have the Azuri soccer team, and you have Croatian, and then they were banned from using ethnic games by the government because
Yes.
that wasn't, that was disgusting, and now God knows what they're doing. But I just wondered, was it difficult when you're researching, because you come back to, your comments about soccer in Sydney and then coming back to what's going on in Perth, and yet they don't talk about really soccer in Perth for women. And we know that soccer in Western Australia started in 1901, but there's not a lot said about women until later.
No.
Soccer in the world started 250 years ago with the Ming dynasty when they were kicking around cloth or whatever. But I just wondered in your research whether or not you can show the difference between soccer and football or rugby for that matter.
There's three, because you did have to mention rugby as well. So.
A lot of the reporting specifically talks about the Australian game, which is Aussie rules. The press back in 1900 seems to have split from talking about football as a round ball game or as the Sydney game, which was rugby, and talked about the Australian game. That is a clue as to what sort of game is being played. The only other clue that is there is where the game is played. In Brisbane they talk about the British Association game, soccer, fine. In Sydney they talk about football, but sorry, that was the other football game, the one that came over from... Yeah. No.
The original AFL wasn't AFL, it was the combination of the Gaelic soccer...
Oh, it was a total mix-up, yes. And continues to be. You look at some of the rule changes that are happening. Not the game I used to mess around with. But it is hard sometimes to work out just what the press report is talking about, and you've got to look at context. And sometimes when there's a photo or a list of names, count up the number of names. If there's only 11, it's soccer. If there's 13, it's rugby. If there's 18, it's Aussie rules. That's how I had to do it. It wasn't easy.
I know that with the East Perth, the railway, the Australian Railways, they've actually got a sort of a museum at East Perth.
Yes.
And in there they've got this big photo of one of their first women's teams. And you can't actually figure out what are they playing, and it took me 6 months of people trying to find out what they
Yep.
They play roller skates.
Good grief.
And I said, you know, you've got no name, you've got no what it is. And they said, oh, well, people upstairs said they didn't want to be known for that, but it's an old photo. But so it's like you were saying about media. People can write whatever they feel. Media can write savages or whatever
Yes.
they like. But when it's hard, especially when you look at the internet today, so much lies are portrayed on the internet. And when you're trying to figure out history,
Yes.
you know, and
It is
having
very,
a
very
training
hard.
system to write something credible, it's
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah, it's very hard. At the back?
Yeah, you were talking about the numbers.
Yes.
Some of the photos had 15 and some had 17. You were talking about Australian photos.
Yes.
So was
That then becomes really difficult, unless there's something within the article that explains it.
It could be some of the right or something.
Yeah.
Just understanding the
Yeah, there could be some missing. Sometimes they actually have the names of the missing people, and that helps. If they don't, yeah, it is hard. It is hard. Greg.
A friend of mine many years ago, she would have been incensed at the fact that the women were being called ladies or girls.
Girlings.
Or
Girlings.
I guess that's by way of a comment, but the question is, were there any age restrictions or for the teams?
I have no idea.
Sort of open, or you don't know?
I have no idea. Without being able to recognise each of the people involved, most of them would have been recent school leavers, but of course there would have been manageresses and people like that who possibly also got involved. There's no record. And that is frustrating.
Helen, so the Brennan family, are you related to?
I believe there is some connection, but I don't know how. There was a sore point with my father, who was a Brennan,
Yes.
about how overnight the Brennan Trotting Oval, the sign was taken down because the Duke of Gloucester appeared,
Yes.
and it went up as Gloucester Park. So it's a very sore point for him. Yes.
Yep.
Well, once the weapon moves out of Gloucester Park as part of the renovation, Gloucester Park is putting a loan to the Libraries of Australia for a curator, so it might come out.
Aha. Good one.
Okay.
Franco.
Perhaps a strange point of view in question. To understand the men and women's point of view in sport, my question is, what is the point of sport? What is the point of football?
Well, the answer to that is, what's the point of life?
Yep, that's a very good answer.
Improve your complexion and your fitness
Improves their physique.
and your physique.
If you ever read the history of the Olympic Games, it will tell you that the idea of sport was to make sure that people, regardless of their colour or their political standing or their financial standing, they could, as a person, of their own right.
And what's the point of competition?
But also, that competition extended beyond, I can run faster than you, I can drive a horse faster than you, I can throw something further than you. That extended into battle. And that was the original need for sport. Sport was practice for war.
Gladiators.
Gladiators, yeah. And, okay, we've taken the war out of it, mostly, but unless it's Collingwood we're playing. Yes.
I mean, you have the Spartans and the Athenians, the Corinthians
Yeah.
and the Thebans. I mean,
That's right.
The Olympic Games,
Yeah.
2000 years ago.
Yeah. Nearly 3,000 years ago. Yeah.
Olympic Games.
It had
They
to.
got back to war again.
Yeah.
Well, I think, could I just say too,
Yeah.
one of the important aspects of sport is to bring people together and to provide them with exercise, all those things about muscular development. People that work hard physically can play a game, any sport.
Yep.
But it enlivens your brain as well as your body, because you've got to work as a team, you've got to try and judge what's going on around you. All these sorts of human aspects we have are born out in sport. And perhaps the most important one is a picture I remember of an Olympic Games years ago where one of the competitors, I don't know whether it was a marathon or something like that, but the fellow fell over in the straight and the leader turned around and helped him up. Now, if that's not a metaphor for decent human behaviour, I'll go here.
Have you done one with men?
No. This one came out of the blue because I found the first two photographs, then accidentally found the other photographs, and from there it grew. It grew into that display, and it grew into tonight's effort at the talk.
Well, with the women's, this is, we've just got the transplant games, and it's, having the transplant games this week. It's the first time Kirkers have held it, and it's been going for 40 years. And it's interesting that more males are transplant recipients than females, and that the youngest one is 4 and the oldest one is 82. But what is interesting at what they promote is that we've got to play sport.
Yep.
In the World Transplant Games is to make people alive. So just because you've got someone's heart or kidney or whatever, don't just sit there and abuse it. You actually have to be healthy, otherwise you have to change your lifestyle.
That's right.
And that's why the Transplant Games started.
Yep.
And if you've got time, you should go and actually see them. It's amazing, this week, it really is. We've got 42 countries coming from all over the world here. But we've got Women's World Cup on the 20th of July. And what people, it's like...
It's getting closer.
It is getting closer. Western Australia had the state bocce championships a couple of weeks ago. We've got state BMX in a couple of weeks.
Bocce.
And they had... Petang games today, which is bowling you do with a jack, bocce, I don't know what they call it ball, petang, they call it a pig, but it's much the same, it's just slightly different balls. Anyway, but with the Women's World Cup, they've got 60 countries coming, and it's the first time ever down under, the Southern Hemisphere, they've actually had one. And it's interesting that some countries, like Western Australia, has Denmark, Haiti, Jamaica, Colombo, China, Korea, Ireland, I can't remember who the other one is, and they're all coming here. None of those places, none of those countries have ever played here before, man or woman. And so it's a different look on selling soccer, but it's called the World Cup. It's a bit like the Yankees with their baseball, the World Series, but they haven't played in America.
Yeah.
And so some people don't have it in their head, but because of the, if you like, the nomenclature of the modern age of what is football, everybody's going back to football. And so is it a round ball, is it the oval ball, is it the rugby ball, is it the tennis ball? It's just, it's crazy out there, the misuse and the use of the word football. And I agree with you, because when you're trying to find history, it's really, really hard.
Very hard.
But I think everybody, there will be more stuff coming out now through FIFA on women and what they've done in soccer in Australia.
I'd be interested to see what comes out of that, because, as I said, up until 1954, which is when Trove finishes its records, there's no mention of the round ball game for women in WA. I know it was here. My grandfather, who went away to the war, played for Claremont prior to World War I. That's how he met my grandmother, because he was playing with her brother. They both went off to war. The brother died in France. Pop came back with a damaged eye, but he came back. And he married. The teacher, his wife, had been a teacher at Maylands Primary School in 19...
The first ever soccer museum football
Yep.
museum in the whole of West Australia was opened on the 13th of February here in WA.
Yep.
And in that, the first ever soccer cup, no mention of women, was donated by the Burke family, which was, if you remember, Septimus Grove ended up being the first ever Attorney General of Australia.
Yep.
And then brother was the Attorney General.
Yep. The Burts ran it.
Bert ran West Australia.
Yes.
But their first one, their first cup was 1901, and that was actually used as a primary soccer cup to 1963.
Right.
I bet a few years because of the war. But it's interesting that that history is lost because of the way it's filed, because if you, even though we're not a convict state, but we've got convicts in to help us because we're not run around by a lot of people in about 1890. They put, the way they catalogued everything was under football. So it's hard to find out
Which one was which?
it was.
Yep.
But that was actually the round ball, and they don't talk about round ball. The photos we've got from 1901, which are, and Vic Park was one of the most significant clubs
Yes.
at that time to win,
Yep.
which would make you think they must have had a female team, but there's no mention of that. But I've got the CEO of the WA Museum on board, and they're actually trying to find anything about women at all.
Right.
Coming into the Women's World Cup. So
It's not easy.
I do believe
Yep.
that the British still call it football, Europe still calls it football. So I do believe there's out there with the people, the history. I'm actually saying a lot of people never talked about it because it was not a done thing.
No.
I do believe that there's a lot of history
That's hidden.
shared.
Yeah.
Could I make a comment? What you're saying is true, but soccer, the name soccer, was a contraction of the game called association football, which is where the soccer part comes in, right? So that's why it's a short, a descriptive name of the game. And the other point, and you made a very interesting point about the World Series baseball. Now, and it sounds like it's the Americans saying that this is the world game.
Yep.
But in fact it is, because there was a newspaper called The World that sponsored baseball. But you see, what happens is, time passes and we all, generations come along and parts of history is forgotten. That's right, and it's or it's construed as something that it wasn't intended to be.
Yeah.
So,
And that was a reassurance for me to realise it wasn't an exceptionalism on that particular occasion. It was actually just the sponsor's name, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The World Series from the newspaper, The World.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how it became.
Exactly.
But I think the World game actually is soccer, of course, because it's really only America with American football and Australia.
Exactly.
Although if you read things like P.G. Wodehouse, football is actually rugby union, of course, because the public schools played football, but that was with the oval ball. And the gentlemen played rugby and the labourers played soccer. I think this is going to be a game changer. I think the World Cup here, we're going to be volunteering there, so we're looking forward to it. As a women's cricket World Cup here was a game changer. The Euros, I know my daughter and my grandchildren in England went to the final at Wembley of the Euros. Fantastic atmosphere, 90,000 people there to watch the women play soccer. I think it needs those big showpiece things to change here. Doesn't help John in trying to find out this information. Thank you very much for that, John. We're here for a while, but let's carry on the conversation tomorrow. Thank you, John.
Thank you.